Good morning, everyone. This meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee is now in order. And today is Thursday, August 3rd. It is 9:03 and change in the morning. And good morning. My name is George Martinez. And I would love to start off with introductions from assembly members if they're here. Anybody else who's in the room, there are other folks in the room, can introduce themselves as they speak or as we go throughout our process, so we can just continue to expedite our introductions. And I'll pass it on to in-person members, and then we'll see if anyone's on the phone.
Yeah, Anna Brawley.
Thank you. Anyone on the phone?
Yeah, Chris Constant here.
All right, Karen Bronga, I heard, and Chris Constant.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen and Chris. Appreciate you all for being here. Member Cross was not able to join us today, my co-chair. And I mentioned also, for the record, we do have other members of staff and community in our midst. And as we have our conversation today, I hope that people will remember to speak loudly. Today we've organized the microphone and the camera in a different location as well. So it's in the front on the podium. So I encourage everyone to speak toward the wall. And usually you're speaking toward a space here, and it could create some audio challenges. I also want to recognize that we're joined by a friend of the community and a person who has a good vision for how we could all work together. Mr. Mike Robbins from the Anchorage Community Development Authority is in the midst of us. So we're going to start off with our unfinished business. I expect a quick meeting today. We wouldn't want to drag any of the elements out. I've identified times on the meeting with respect to agenda items. Roughly, some of these will be a little faster. And then there are a few items that I will mention that pre-game kind of came to my mind that I want to raise as part of, not necessarily new business, but after we go through our presentations of our agenda. Thank you. And we're also joined by Assembly Counsel, Dean Gates. Great. So our annual work plan updates, when you see an unfinished business agenda item A, this continues to be the list of projects and products that we discussed a couple of weeks back, where we gathered all of the items that were referred to our committee, and we ordered them in short, intermediate, and long-term agenda items for action or discussion. So, following along our trajectory, this meeting today, our first item is one of the elements that was identified for August was to expand the tax abatement and reinvestment focus areas. Now, I'd hope that, because I wasn't on the body when that was identified as a work plan, or an item for our work plan, I'd hope that Member Cross would be able to give us some background on it. But if there's anyone in here that can give us background on what that item is, expand tax abatement and reinvestment focus areas, and if there is any current or future facing work to come on that front, I'd love to hear if there's anything in the hopper.
This is Christopher.
Yes, I see member Constant, please, go ahead.
Thanks. So I can't speak to other efforts to broaden like the tax, the reinvestment focus area, or the specific efforts to expand it toward Midtown or other areas or citywide. If we do it citywide, I would argue it will wash out the ability to use it in a targeted way. But there is the North Anchorage Tax Abatement Program, the East Downtown, that's about to expire. It's only been used once in the 10 years it was on the code. And so Mr. Gates and I have been working on an extension to that project. So I know that there will be a proposal to extend an already existing tax abatement for additional time.
Thank you, Member Constant. I have Member Brawley in the queue, and then we have a community member, Mr. Chu.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't have information, but I think it would be helpful, or at least I would request at a future meeting going through this in a little more detail and maybe having a list of what we have. And then what I also want to understand is we have these things, we have reinvestment focus areas. So one question is, are they working as intended? So Mr. Constant mentioned that it's only been used once in 10 years. So I appreciate the intent of it, but I think it's also a question, is it designed the way that it should be? Or like, why aren't people using it? Because one project in 10 years is not very many. And then also to understand what we can do in current code versus the legislative bill that's being considered, because obviously that wouldn't exist if we had all the tools that we already wanted or could use. So anyway, just to put that on the table, I think those are some helpful things, because I just don't understand what we already have, what we don't have, and why. And then it helps to evaluate those things and if and where it could be expanded and how it could be improved.
Yeah, absolutely. No, a great point, Member Brawley. We're joined in person by Member Brown. Hello, Karen. Good to see you. Mr. Pachuti?
Thank you. Appreciate private consultant. I'm going to pinch it with my co-conspirator here, Mr. Robbins, on a couple of these. But I wanted to address a couple of things that are important to note. First is there should be a distinction between the tax abatement incentivization tools that are available in the municipality and the RFAs. They are tangerines and oranges. They're somewhat related, but they're not the same thing. The real magic of the RFA, or one of the pieces of magic of the RFA, is the ability to introduce tax-based incentives to the RFA areas to encourage redevelopment. Currently in Anchorage, we have a smallish toolbox of tax incentives, and they fall in several different categories. The first you heard Assemblymember Constant describe, and this is the North Downtown or Fairview East Downtown redevelopment zone. It's an innovative approach to creating a tax incentive for a large swath of underdeveloped and, I would argue, somewhat dilapidated or dilapidating areas of our community. And the justification or the authorization to do that comes from tax tool number 2, which is called the Deteriorated Property Tax Abatement Program. This is one that exists in state statute that does not require legislative changes to actually realize the full benefit of that tool. It has been used just under half a dozen times, I'd say, in our community over the past 15 years or so. It is a somewhat complicated tool at times because it is a two-step process tool. It does require this body, the Assembly, to determine that an area is deteriorated in advance. And once that determination has been made, then the applicants for redevelopment can come to the CFO with a proposal on their redevelopment plan. It includes an economic or pro forma presentation that shows the impact of that tax abatement on their bottom line, if you will. And the basic justification of that tax incentive is, without these tax tools, these dilapidated properties could not be redeveloped. That one allows for a tax abatement of up to 10 years maximum, up to 100% of property tax abatement. In addition, it allows up to 5 years of tax deferral beyond that as well. So if you wanted to push your taxes off to later years. It's executed in a variety of ways across the municipality, most notably in downtown. You have the former McKay building, I believe now called McKinley Apartment Tower. That was the first charity tax abatement tool program that happened. And then you're looking at the results of a couple of current ones with the redevelopment that Peach Investments is doing right across from the PAC. There's also one that exists in Spenard. I think some of them are probably very familiar with this one. Central Spenard area between Chugach Way and 36th. And you've seen Cook Inlet Housing use that one to develop their Spenard Phase 2, or Spenard East, Phase 1 project. The other tool that's out there is the housing tax abatement tool. This is the program that for anyone who can add 4 new units of residential to our downtown area, they are eligible for a 12-year tax abatement. This one in particular, though, is hampered by state statute right now because there is a conflict in the way the code is written, in the way the statute is written, that does not technically allow the city to fully abate property taxes on those eligible properties. But there has been a concentrated effort over the past year to introduce those statutory changes in Juneau. And I'll turn to Mike.
Yeah, question.
Sure.
Member Constant, are you on the phone with the question for right now, or will you wait till the end of the conversation?
Well, it is on this topic.
All right, go ahead, Member Constant.
Before we pivot off of this.
Go ahead, you got it.
Okay, thanks. Two things, really. Chris, I think we need to be very careful about how we speak about 100% abatement, because we have come up with a real conundrum with one of the properties that has received said 100% abatement, but really it's 100% is allowed under state law. And what that means specifically is that the state law does not allow us to abate school district costs. And some applicants to these tax benefit programs have been operating under the belief that 100% means 100%. And so I think for all of us around the table, when we talk about what's allowed under law, we need to be really clear to those who may apply that it's 100% as allowed, because they make their plans based on their perception that we could do something we can't under law, and then we have a conflict. So that's one thing. And then to Ms. Brawley, your point about maybe we need to adjust this program so it gets used better, I would love to come up with better ways, but what I have come to the conclusion of after many, many, many years of attempting to use these tools is that most projects would not live or die because of the tax abatements we offer, because our tax base, our costs are actually, despite what everyone likes to say, are low. They're not significant enough to be the thing that throws the project into success, right? And so it's like icing on the cake. It's not the cake. So I just want people to understand why. And there probably are better and smarter ways to do it, but we've been down that road and looking as hard as we can. And while it's a limited benefit, it is a benefit. We should keep it and expand it where targeted. We just need to operate in reality that the cost of these taxes aren't really so significant that when we abate them, it's like, oh, magic, we're going to get development. It's just one tool that's limited. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Constant. Before we go back to the presentation of Council Gates had comments?
Yes, thank you. I was going to also point out that reinvestment focus areas and tax abatement are separate things, and Mr. Schutte described them in great detail. I was going to give a little superficial description, but I just wanted to add two things. One was, like Mr. Constant pointed out, I don't think it's 100% tax abatement for a deteriorated area, the tax abatement area. It's 100% tax abatement on the improvements that are made by the applicants. They apply and they get approved. Then the improvements and the value that they add to property by the improvements they make are what gets abated. So that's the current tax level and amount. It stays the same throughout. And I think that might be the distinction that Mr. Schutte referred to that needs some clarification, and maybe they're asking to change in Juneau. That would certainly help, I think, improve the incentives provided by that program. And the second thing I would add is Mr. Constant said the North Anchorage tax abatement area, it expires, I think, June 2024. So we've got some time, but we should get started. And I think as it comes up for reauthorization, the Assembly can make findings. There's a number of findings from the 2014 ordinance, but I think that the Assembly currently can look at what's changed, from past 10 years, maybe the boundary speaks and things like that. So there's much to consider for just renewing this North Anchorage tax abatement area.
Thank you. Ms. Ross?
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on what Chris was talking about. He did a great job of explaining the current, some of the current abatements with Mr. Constant himself. So we, ACDA did sponsor SB 77 and HB 84, which focuses on addressing the 50% school district portion abatement that we had a problem with that Mr. Constant was talking about. And we've been speaking with House leadership and Senate leadership, and we believe that it'll pass early in this next session. So we will have that problem rectified. But to a broader scope, ACDA, we talked about this at the Housing Summit earlier this year, we did engage McKinley Research, and they have been doing a nationwide study of abatements and tax incentives and programs that are being used in other communities around the country. And that report should be coming out mid-month. And that's something that I think you'll find helpful when you start to address this topic of what other things can we do, because it is frustrating. We do have some tools in our tool belt, but we are fairly limited because of state law. We can't do tax increment financing. We can't do some of the things that are used regularly in other markets to spur development. And with, as Member Constant was talking about, with our tax base and the I guess, I hate to use the word small when I talk about our tax base, but because we don't have those huge numbers to work with, sometimes it's harder on the abatements. But I will say that if you look at the information that's available that AgNewBEC has done, that part of our challenge is with the length of our abatements and not necessarily the amount of the abatements, because if you look at AgNewBEC's recent study, they did determine that if we had a 25-year abatement, for example, then a lot of these projects would pencil. And so we're working with hope to be able to present this body and the assembly with some new ideas at the new summit that's coming up when we have a chance to look at that report. And then our focus in this next session is going to be trying to work with the assembly and the administration to try to come up with some other things that we can advocate for on behalf of those tools. There's a statewide appetite to make these law changes right now because of the housing shortage all across the state. And so while we're focused, some of this work affects all of it, Alaska, it's for those of us who've lived here a long time, as acreage goes, so goes the state, and so we have to sometimes lead the charge for everyone else. And I think that as a city that we can do that. In Juneau, there's a huge appetite to make this work, and we need to take advantage of that to strike while iron's hot. So.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. It's a wonderful update. I'm looking forward to your project, Mr. Constant, so that we can take advantage of this body as you work through that process. And I would love to get that mid-month report.
You will. We'll present it to you guys here at the assembly. We'll present it at the housing study. Absolutely.
Our next meeting on August 17th, we will have a section where we're going to be looking again at the vacant and abandoned properties, and I'll have a few presentations. It would be good that
I will see if we can have it by then. I'm not exact. She didn't give me a date yet, but she said
if it's available, that would be great.
We'll bring it.
Wonderful. Member Brawley, and then
Mr. Martinez?
we have Member Brawley,
Sure.
and then we'll come back to you, Constant.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to briefly reiterate and maybe refine my ask, it sounds like if we're going to be talking about new ideas at the summit, then I really do think we need a work session this fall with the assembly to catch all of us up on what all these things are, including a written list of them and a map, because I think it'll just help to clarify what these different things are. And then also just to say, I think there's some perception in the public and distrust of these incentives, or perception that they're giveaways, and so I think we really need to address that misperception because they are tools that are used in a lot of places and are things that can benefit our city and long-term help the economy instead of giving away public funds as the perception is. So again, I really just think we need to establish an understanding of that in advance of talking about any new ones as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Constant, and then we'll go to Member Brown.
Thanks. So I have to take the opposite position. Not that we don't need the records and documents, I agree with that, but that it's a misperception that there is a giveaway. I just heard Mr. Robbins suggest that the theory is let's give a 25-year tax abatement. And that's going to be a hell of a high bar, in my opinion, for us to contemplate going in that direction, because effectively, if we're going to subsidize a multimillionaire corporation to build luxury apartments for rent downtown as an example, and we're going to abate their taxes for 25 years. We've effectively we've saddled my Fairview neighbors with the tax burden of that property. And while it's wise to do it in a targeted way, we've been very generous with these abatements, even though they're limited and don't do a lot. But the fact is, other people are paying those bills for them. And so I look forward to the conversation about how we target these abatements to achieve policy goals, just creating housing so that we are subsidizing high-end properties that will sell and rent and list anyways. It just is, it feeds the fuel of the perception of a giveaway. And I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a misperception. I think it is incumbent upon us to have a really strong justification, well beyond just it simply creates housing units. And so I look forward to that conversation.
Thank you. And one final comment on the issue, Member Brown.
So I've just had concerns if you try to get the state to go ahead and let you not pay the school tax. Our schools are bleeding. Our governor is breaking the backs of education, and if we take these large properties downtown and they are now able to not pay to help with public education, that's a problem for me. Especially, our presentation yesterday that Oklahoma City, how they turn themselves around is investing in schools. And so maybe these people who are developing downtown could consider themselves as part of the solution in investing in schools and not having that part of the school tax taken out.
Thank you, Member Bronco. This was, there's a lot. I love it. One area, there's a lot of learning that we are requesting information about. There's issues and action items that are coming down the pipeline. And so looking forward to continuing to learn more about this and bringing this forward. I hope that folks who are connected to this are hearing some of these challenges and some of the questions that have been raised by our members. And on that, we'll move forward to the next item. And we'll keep this moving with us on our agenda and our work plan. Member Salt just joined us on the phone.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item was to just get a quick update on the roadmap to a vital and safe Anchorage. At our last meeting, we did get an update, and the update was basically the elements that were associated with a bigger report that were connected to our interests. And we asked if there was more. I think Member Brawley and some other folks asked if there was more information. Christopher Schutte did follow up requesting if there was more information, and there isn't. So we heard that the contract for that work with the SALT group, My Professions, it's expired, essentially, and so the work product is done, and that update that we received is the final update from that particular project at that point in time. So if there's anything else to come down, we'll be keeping our ears open as that group from the Development Corporation takes that work and turns it into projects that we may be able to see come out in the pipe. But for anybody who's interested in that, it was published on our website, on the CEDC website. So you can visit that by visiting the Assembly webpage on the municipal website and going through the committees to our CEDC committee, and you'll see that information that was available with respect to the update. Great. Our next item is the 3 and 4-plex expansion. We had, in our part of our annual work plan updates, it was identified that there was something potentially in the pipeline for August timeline. So this is really to see if there is, what is it, and I would love to see if, I think Council Gates was identified as the point of the POC of that item when we did our work plan update. I would love to hear if we do have something coming down the pipe that the Assembly members could expect to work on with respect to 3 and 4-plex expansion. Turn it over to Council Gates to give us an update, or none.
Well,
And-
I can give a really short update.
And
as well.
just quickly, member, Co-Chair Cross has also joined us on the phone as well. Thank you.
So yes, just a short update.
Yes, please.
You mentioned an August timeline. We do have our working group meeting here on August 18th, and I think that we might be wrapping up. And then we have our draft ordinances. We had a great robust discussion and developed and identified certain areas of code to change and some that maybe shouldn't change. But we're very close, and I expect that after the 18th we'll be ready to probably introduce. That's looking like to me the first meeting of September. But hopefully we'll bring the documents to comment here, depending on how the sponsors want to move forward.
Great.
I think that's all I have.
You know, that's wonderful. That gives us a timeline that there is a project being worked on. August 18th is the next work group meeting where you'll be working that project a little further. Are there any questions from any of our members? No, great. Thank you for that update. We'll look forward to it. And if there's any ways that this committee could be supportive of vetting and working through any of the issues, just keep us closely tabbed. Our next meeting is August 17th, so it'll be just before your work session. I look forward to participating in the work session.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. For the record, our next item, as identified as HLB Work Plan, Heritage Land Bank Work Plan, is not a work plan update today. For our purposes, our annual work plan updates included an update from HLB regarding a resolution that was an item of discussion 6 months ago or so. So again, it predates my tenure and new members' tenure on the assembly. But today we're going to have a short presentation on that resolution, an update from that vantage point, and an invitation to the Heritage Land Bank's actual work session and about their work plan tomorrow at City Hall at 1 p.m. in room 155 for the full Heritage Land Bank work plan presentation tomorrow. But today we're going to just hear a touch point about the resolution that came before us with respect to our body of work, and I'll turn it over to Emma Gibney.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. How do I?
So you'll just let me know when you want it.
Okay, I'll give you
For those on the phone, we have a presentation here. Any information that we make available visually to us today, we'll try to make it available, published online.
It's online right now if they want to
Wonderful.
follow along. Okay, good morning. I'm Emma Gibney. I'm a land management officer for Heritage Land Bank. I was asked to come here today to give an overview of the report that we gave in response to Assembly Resolution 2023-40 that I presented in April to the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee, as well as give an update on projects that we are currently working on in Girdwood. Next slide. I think you can press like the arrow buttons. Okay, not with the PDF, unfortunately. Okay, well, first I wanted to start with a brief introduction to Heritage Land Bank. I know we have a few new assembly members, and maybe some people could use a reminder that HLB is a division of the real estate department. It was established in 1983. We actually had our 40th anniversary 2 days ago of the ordinance that created Heritage Land Bank. HLB is a self-supporting, non-tax-based agency. Our mission is to manage uncommitted municipal land and the HLB fund in a manner designed to benefit the present and future residents of Anchorage, promote orderly development, and achieve the goals of the comprehensive plan. HLB currently manages over 12,700 acres of municipal land, the majority of which has multiple development limitations.
Next slide.
So looking closer at Girdwood now, HLB owns 58 parcels in Girdwood. That's over 6,300 acres, which is just under 50% of all HLB acreage. Within those 6,300 acres, about 600 of them are wetlands, 400 are in avalanche hazard zones, and about 700 of them are in special flood hazard areas. As far as the zoning goes, the vast majority of the acreage is in the other zoning designation, which includes zoning districts such as open space, parks, recreational reserve, watershed, etc. About 380 are designated for residential, 80 for resort, 25 for commercial, and 20 for industrial.
Next slide, please.
In February, the Assembly passed AR 2023-40 as amended, which in part requested that HLB compile a list from the HLB inventory of uncommitted parcels that are suitable for residential or commercial development in Girdwood. It further requested that HLB include information about existing utilities, plats, studies, and also estimate development costs to prepare the land for constructing dwellings. This request was for the purpose of determining which HLB parcels might be feasible for development as part of a longer-term goal for increasing attainable residential housing in Girdwood. But what does feasible for development mean? Well, HLB staff identified 7 criteria required for a parcel to be considered potentially developable. First, it must be uncommitted, meaning that there is not a lease or designated purpose. Second, infrastructure such as water mains, sewer mains, electricity, and roads must be within half a mile of the parcel. The third criteria is that the parcel is mostly uplands, meaning that it is not in the intertidal areas or that it is majority Class A wetlands. Fourth, the parcel needs to be relatively flat or minimally sloped. Another important factor is the zoning. Is it appropriate for residential and commercial development? The sixth criteria is that other environmental considerations are not prohibitive. This includes special flood hazard areas as well as avalanche zones. Lastly, for a parcel to be feasible for development, there cannot be any plat notes that restrict development. This includes stream setbacks, easements, restrictions, or development requirements.
Next slide, please.
Using this criteria, it was determined that out of the 58 parcels in Girdwood, 11 are potentially feasible for development. Here on the map, you can see the 11 parcels. You can see that many of them are along the Alyeska Highway and near other developed areas. Many of these parcels have been considered for development in the past and are designated for development in the applicable area and master plans. While these are the most feasible parcels for development, that does not imply that they are easily developable. This report's intention was to establish a preliminary baseline of development capability for HLB parcels within Girdwood. That being said, HLB currently has several projects in Girdwood on these parcels.
Next slide, please.
The projects listed here are some of our big Girdwood projects that I would like to update you about. First, we have HLB parcels 6-011, 16, and 17. Currently, HLB is working with the state to vacate a Section 9 easement so that we can finalize a replat of these parcels to better define the developable and open space areas. This replat was approved by the Platting Board last November. Next, we have the Girdwood Cemetery project on parcel 6-018. This parcel was not included in the development feasibility study because it was already committed to become a future cemetery. HLB will continue to work with the Girdwood Board of Supervisors and the Cemetery Committee as this project progresses. Further south, in the Southtown site, we have HLB parcel 6-076. HLB is currently working with the Girdwood Community Land Trust on the potential development of this parcel. HLB and GCLT are in the process of negotiating a letter of intent that will reserve this parcel for up to 2 years so that Girdwood, GCLT, and community stakeholders may conduct feasibility studies on housing and mixed-use development that meets the highest and best standard for municipal land development and follows Title 25 code requirements. HLB has an ongoing monthly meeting with GCLT. Next, we have HLB parcel 6-057F, also known as the Girdwood Industrial Park. This parcel is one of the only areas zoned for industrial use in Girdwood. It is a vital part of the local economy and a top priority for HLB in the coming year. While Phase 1 was finished several years ago, portions of Phase 2 and 3 were only partially completed. Future plans for the industrial park will begin with community conversations with GBOS industrial park permittees, internal agencies, the HLB Advisory Commission, and area stakeholders. Lastly, the last project I want to mention is the sale of HLB parcel 6-043 to the U.S. Forest Service. This was approved by the Assembly in 2022, and it is anticipated to close in the coming months. Next slide, please. In conclusion, while HLB owns a significant amount of land in Girdwood, most of it is unsuitable for development. HLB will continue to work with all stakeholders, public and private, to continue to meet the needs of the area and maintain the mission of the Heritage Land Bank. This presentation is available on this committee's website with links to the full Girdwood feasibility report that was presented back in April, as well as a link to HLB's website with more information, including interactive maps that give information about every single one of our parcels. If you ever have any questions regarding Heritage Land Bank, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members that have any high-level questions? I don't see anyone in person. Anyone on the phone have any questions?
Yep, George.
Yes. Who's this?
Yeah, I
Member
do.
Constant?
Christopher.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks. So I heard recently that on that parcel that has the potential for commercial industrial use, that there is a proposal going forward, maybe somewhat far along, relating to a hardware store out there. Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, I can answer that question. That is, I think you're talking about a parcel that HLB does not own. I've heard that there's a private development looking to build a hardware store kind of near the brewery.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Member Constant. If there's anybody else on the phone that,
Yep.
just identify yourself if you have a
Member
question.
Yeah, hey, Member Martinez, Randy Schultz here. So I was just curious if I get a little bit more of a detailed status of Holton Hills that we had postponed indefinitely, but I understand it's coming back, or it might come back before the assembly. I just want a little more on that one. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so just as a reminder about Holton Hills, that, the RFP was put out in 2021. The RFP was awarded to CY Investments, Pomeroy Lodging, and Seth Anderson, but then that project was bifurcated. So CY Investments was going to work on the area to the west of Glacier Creek, and Pomeroy Lodging and Seth Anderson were going to work on the area to the east. Is that right? Yeah, to the east of Glacier Creek. So in February, the Assembly, like you said, they indefinitely postponed a proposed disposal to CY Investments. Since then, HLB has been in conversation with GBOS to answer community questions that they've had. We are going to continue working with the RFP winners and internal agencies and the community as these projects progress. We don't have any significant updates about the Holton Hills portion of that project at this time. We have been in preliminary conversations with Pomeroy Lodging. We're working to identify site constraints, development needs, and concept designs that maximize the need for commercial success of the resort while ensuring workforce and residential housing needs are met.
Member Salt?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We have Council Gates.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about the Holton Hills development and with CY Investments. There was a development agreement. Since the Assembly postponed it definitely, I just wonder if any action was taken by CY Investments, the municipality, to terminate that development agreement.
Not at this time that I know of at my level, anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. This was a helpful.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, can you repeat that question? I couldn't quite make it out.
Can you repeat your question, Mr. Gates?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I asked if there was any action to terminate the development agreement with CY Investments after the Assembly postponed indefinitely the ordinance for approval, and just give any answer that not that she's aware of.
Right, and I would offer that I understand that agreement extends through 2025, and I have heard there are some conversations about potentially proposing to the Assembly to extend the agreement by a year.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Good to know. That's why we hold space for information. If there are no additional items on that, I invite folks again tomorrow to the full Heritage Land Bank work plan presentation, work session with the Assembly at 1 p.m. at City Hall, room 155. Thank you. And again, you all are invited to continue to stick around because our next part of our conversation today is this was also identified in our work plan. Again, these subjects, these headings were identified for us, and so we've inherited them. Expand the roles of community land trusts. Today, I just wanted to open up what that was. What is that, and then how we understand that to go into potential workflow. And for that, I asked if Christopher Schutte could you are identified as one of the points of contact for that conversation. Expand the roles of community land trusts. What does that mean at this point in time, and what should we be thinking about?
Thank you for shooting through the chair. I'll actually punt most of this because it's kind of a broad topic, and I'm going to call for a couple of friends in the room to talk about the role of community land trusts from their perspective. Tiffany Briggs with the Real Estate Department and Emma with HLB have significantly more experience with community land trusts, I think, or the concept of community land trusts, especially given their work with the Girdwood Land Trust that's formed. I'll pass it over to them, but I'll just provide a high-level preview that there are community land trusts here in town to be aware of. We heard Girdwood mentioned as organizing one, which is exciting. There has been an Anchorage Community Land Trust for, I think, almost 2 decades, maybe, about 15 years or so. Wonderful organization that really has pushed the envelope on what a land trust can do and does. They have turned themselves into more of an economic and community development engine than just simply a land trust. And then I'll also offer that in some regards, Community Development Authority is in a way a land trust in that they do own and hold real estate for the purpose of developing to the benefit of the public. And they have done a number of projects over the past 15, 20 years in that space as well. And Mike or Jim can certainly give an overview of the work that they've done to execute on land that's held in trust. But at a high level, and I left out one important one. The newest and most exciting is the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust that was stood up this past year. Jason Bockensted's group, whose purpose is to function as a community land trust specifically around acquiring, owning, and maintaining affordable housing for extremely low-income individuals, et cetera. And you've seen a lot of the headlines lately about the projects they've done in Spenard, as well as a few other hotel properties they've acquired over the past year. So multiple land trusts currently in action here in Anchorage. So we're very excited about that. But I don't know who wants to go first to fill in some of the gaps. Emma and Tiff or Mike, you guys want to talk about either Girdwood and how they're executing, or Mike, you want to talk about ACDA?
Ladies first, please.
And again, we're just sticking high level. Thank you, Christopher Schutte. High level, how we see them, what potentials we may have, and your vantage point.
All right. Hi, Emma here. I'll take a whack at that. So my only experience with Community Land Trust is working with Girdwood Community Land Trust, and they're a nonprofit community organization. They came to us wanting to work on creating affordable housing and mixed-use developments in Girdwood. And we view them as a partner on these projects. But I don't have an extensive amount of experience with land trusts. I know that they're more of a grassroots organization with people from the actual local community trying to work on really specific community needs.
Well, let me follow up on that. So let me put a little context to it. There are different land trusts with different purposes, focusing on some different needs. And as a starting point, just for new members into this conversation, I would love to go back to the first conversation we had and just kind of getting definitions and understand. I would love to have like who are the land trusts and where are they operating now, kind of sense. Because there are new ones, and national news, national headlines had the City of Anchorage, Rasmussen's nonprofit, philanthropic organization, and the new land trust, the Anchorage Affordable Housing, and that one, the Bachnestat one, have these conversions. So there's action happening. I'm familiar with ACLT, as you described. Lots of energy in North Anchorage and Mountain View. Tremendous projects, and then to hear that there are grassroots folks kind of organizing that way, just to get a sense of who's doing what and where, and then what are the possibilities. Because I think this also speaks a little bit about the empowerment of localized visions, potentially, and I think that's exciting for people to consider the opportunities to explore these things. If there are any members, but did Ms. Roberts have any comments on this?
I was just going to add, I'm not an expert on land trust, but I was going to add that if the committee would like to put this on the agenda for the next meeting, ACDA will prepare a white paper for you and for all the members, so that you can understand what we currently have as land trusts. I'll work with Chris and tap his knowledge, and we'll put together a white paper so that you have a clear picture of land trusts, how they're used, what they can be used for, so that you can see if that is a tool that we want to spend some more time developing for our tool belt, or if it's something that we're maximizing already. Because I wish I was an expert, but I'm not, and so I'll make sure that we get you the information, and I'll learn along with you.
So that's a wonderful offer. We'll all learn together, and we'll take you up on that. So we'll keep you connected to our agenda as we build out our agenda. But August 17th will be our next meeting. And I have a member on the phone that requested to get in the queue. Just identify yourself and then ask your question.
Yeah, this is Claire Ross, Anchorage Assembly staff. I also wanted to point out, I think this item on the work plan may have come from Member Rivera, and there is also a new housing trust fund, which maybe this is referring to as well. Alaska was one of only 2 states that doesn't have a statewide affordable housing trust, and the legislature approved that and funded it a little bit in 2022. And so I think at one point the Assembly had put it on their priority list to get that funded every year. And there was a presentation, some group, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, presented at a work session last year. So I can dig up those materials and get them around to catch everyone up on the Alaska Housing Trust.
Thank you, Claire. That would be very helpful. We would appreciate that.
Okay.
Great. Any members in the room that have any additional comments or questions? Member Braun?
So I don't know how, and if you're bringing something about this public lands like the PLI land, how that also intersects with this. And we just recently got a letter, probably all the Assembly people, about questions of the legality of the Tudor Elmore Navigation Center because of uses of PLI land, right, and what it actually could be used for, and questioning whether the shelter is an allowable use. So I have no idea, and that would be helpful to know more about that.
We have, thank you, Member Braun. We have a response from Christopher Shute.
Actually, Mike raised his hand first.
Okay.
No, I haven't seen the letter, but I've heard about the letter, but I've had a couple of conversations around the corners of it, I guess, and it appears, I'm not sure that the letter is absolutely correct, but I believe that is a lawful use for the land.
And I'll just add that that's an interesting, not necessarily the shelter, but your question about PLI, public lands and institution zone property, is an interesting one, because that falls 100% in the wheelhouse of the 2 women sitting next to you, who own and manage all of that PLI land on behalf of the citizens of Anchorage. So when we have this conversation about what land trusts do and don't do, let's not leave out our friends at real estate and HLB, because they're also a land trust in sort of on behalf of the citizens of Anchorage.
Can I follow up?
Yes, please.
Have you seen the letter from
It
Ms.
was, yes, I did see it.
Okay, I was gonna forward it if you didn't have it.
Yes, I did.
You forwarded to me.
Sure.
That'd be great.
So just for the record, we're forwarding that letter, and if you could share with us to make sure we have it as well. That'd be great. But there was also just, what I want to make sure we close off with is, there's interest in this area, right? And it seems that as we go through areas where there's potential opportunities for innovation, development, these are all the interesting areas that this committee wants to really look at. So each one of these agenda items save the update, but even in the update, there are action items that are coming down the pipe for the assembly at some point. So there are a lot of work in all of these categories, and I think that's very exciting. But if we can have that white paper, and if anyone else, I would love to invite you all back as well, because our next meeting, we will focus on bringing some of these items back so we can have updates on them. But they really all will connect to redevelopment and vacant and abandoned properties that I expect that we'll have on our next meeting. We'll also talk about, we had an invitation or request from the ABCs working on the Equity Center downtown, doing a building conversion, to come do a presentation on some of the barriers and challenges that they're having with their building conversion. So I think all of that is learning and interesting for us, so we expect it. But this is an interesting conversation, so as you all are having your brainstorming sessions, anything that you think is going to be useful for us, we welcome it. Great. If there are no other members, I don't see any other text messages with respect to any questions. Keep this item, we'll keep tracking on this item as we move forward, but we'll move forward as we get close to the end of our scheduled time. Today we're here to 10:30, but we'll be short. I have a few items that I wanted to just highlight that in our workflow, where they land with respect to our new business or some changes that we take with respect to our venue. But I did want to open up to any conversation now before we go into audience participation. And the first things are, I would be interested in, and I'll just shorthand this, a custom. What is the dashboard data that this committee can collect or can have access to from permitting department, from our building services department? And I'm talking about essentially customer-facing dashboard information. When we have the health policy committee meets, the health department will give us updates on essentially customer-facing, forward-facing, public engagement-facing data, which is they have a lot of information. So we'll gather that so folks can have a sense. But as we have this conversation about expediting permitting processes, about streamlining all sorts of processes within a building that has a lot happening, or within these systems that have a lot happening, I'm interested in how we know if we're getting better. And I'm interested in how we can have the community be aware of the level of work that happens. And I think all of that information and data is important to telling the story of our workflow. It's also important to know if we're getting better at things. And so I wouldn't know necessarily what categories of the data that would speak to our customer dashboard data, but that would be interesting for me to start to mine away. And I'd also, again, we'll get you all kind of the way the health department looks at that. But they give us updates on, and Karen's co-chair of the health policy committee. When the health department director comes through, they give pretty thorough updates on numbers of people
How many
served,
syphilis cases?
how many cases served, how many people served, and then if there's a grant for TB, how many people got the vaccination, and so it's the constant kind of ecosystem of that interaction with the public and a dashboard way that I'm interested in. If there's any comments, and when I asked that question, Craig Lyons' name came up, so I saw movement and bobbing and weaving in the audience. But how does that land for folk from staff who we would be requesting this from? Are there some high-level categories that we can just hear today that may fit into this sort of report? And I wouldn't necessarily want to have a definitive plan today, because I'm just thinking of what this could be, and then thinking of the frequency that would make it make sense to the workflow. But any thoughts or comments on that would be appreciated from staff, and then if any members want to add on, we'll do a few. Craig?
It was inevitable, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Craig Lyon, Planning Department. So I know that there's all sorts of data that's collected, either by the Development Services Department or by Planning Department. They are compiled for our performance measures that we send downtown. You know, how long we are working on residential permits or, you know, non-conforming creatures, etc. So there's all sorts of data out there. I don't know who has it, who compiles it in its own B, but we can get that and share that. It just depends on what exactly out of the data dump what you want.
Yes, yes. So what I hear is that we do have lots of data collected, and then we can have access to data. Two questions fundamentally would be what we want access to, and I'll drive that back to telling the story of what matters to the public perception of our work and the effectiveness of the things that we're doing to improve services and engagement and outcomes for the public. So I think that and I'd love to hear from members today as we capture some ideas today. But I also saw Christopher Schutte have a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just to build off of what Mr. Lyon said, the Office of Management and Budget has somewhat antiquated measures of service delivery called PBRs, which I can't remember collectively what it stands for. But I can tell you that it was a requirement of departments to keep those updated, and they contain some useful measures of service delivery, et cetera. So that would be one resource to rely on. The other is that the the Development Services Department in particular, which uses a different permitting platform than folks in planning, do have the ability to spit out some granular metrics or granular information about the things that are happening on that side of the building. There are basically 2 reports that they produce that would be valuable to this group, and I'm sure they could produce even more if you wanted to invite someone from DS to be here. But they are, every Wednesday, there are permit activity reports that are sent out that show a look back over the previous week, what types of permits have come in, the value of those permits, and measures of how the permit department is doing year to date versus last year. Some measures to show you, what activity is happening. This week's, I don't have it in front of me, but I recall the one we got yesterday, essentially showing that overall commercial and residential permit activity for the year is running about 89%, to my recollection, of where we were last year. Also in those reports, they provide just a little snapshot of some of the notable higher dollar projects, and one that stood out to me actually was a townhouse development that got permitted last week, which is kind of exciting. But anyway, that's one. The second one is one that they compile usually a month or 2 months after close of a month. So they just published, I think, May's report. And this one is much more in-depth and breaks it down and shows you what are the single-family home permits that are coming through, what are the multifamily, what are commercial construction, government work, and provides a great deal of granular information that would be valuable. Now, the tough part is that runs typically 2 months behind, so you're looking backwards, but it's chock full of great information. So, long story short, I would suggest that between Mr. Lyon and Mr. Nossinger and Development Services, you probably could get some great stuff.
That sounds very exciting to me in terms of all of those different categories. Thank you for flagging that for us. I see where it needs to go to get the formal request is happening, so that's great. Anybody on the phone have any comments? We're going to go to Member Brawley first here, and if you do, we'll come back to you after Member Brawley. Member Brawley?
Yeah, thanks. Just a suggestion for the dashboard data is, because I noticed this, we use building permits as a metric, which I understand, but then I think it obscures, it always talks about new construction, which is important. And then it also tends to focus on mostly single-family homes, although I know it also tracks multifamily. So I would also love to see on a dashboard, and it's probably not updated that often, but the fair market rent, because I know HUD publishes that. Like, so these are also easily available data points. I just want to see how rent is increasing. And then I want to see. We can probably get some basic MLS data on like the number of days on the market for a home. I mean, basically the numbers that they already track.
Yes.
And I know Member Myers and I were kind of nerding out on data a while ago. So I think even though those aren't things that are tracked by the building department, if there's other things we can leverage, and really I want to pull in the rental story as much as possible because that comes through multifamily, which can also be condos, but I don't want to lose sight of that when we talk a lot about building new homes for purchase.
Yes. In the room, we have Member Bronga. Next, and folks on the phone are more welcome to text me and let me know, but until that, Member Bronga.
So are you talking about like when you have your meeting, kind of like Director Rash just spits through some things, so we need to develop a template that we could be helped with on the value of permits. Instead of that whole report though, we're teasing out some things like a data dashboard. Like the new building permits, number of inspections, abandoned properties that were abated, code enforcement fines collected, things of that sort. So maybe we could put together the template of things that we would find interesting rather than like just being spit a whole big report.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. The two questions are, what exists in terms of reports that would be valuable? And I think Christopher Schutte mentioned some of those things, and I think those would be great things. And then it's what exists or can we ask for, request, or gather as well in our unique way, because we have a vantage point that is going to pull it all together independent of how the report is generated. So that's exactly right. And it's really, to Member Brawley's point, from my vantage point, how we call the data together to be able to start to understand the context that we're operating in a little clearer, but to bring the public alongside us as we make decisions within that context. So yes, so I love those other things that you just mentioned as well, because I think they help tell the story. And there may be different stories happening, but to identify some starting point would be really helpful. Are there any members on the phone with respect to this question? If not, we'll move on, and we'll just about going to open up. Great, I don't see anyone on the phone, so the last item is, I'll just share, we will, we're going to take a look at venue for the meeting, and for this meeting. It's something that we just want to have a look at, and so I just wanted to let folks know. This room is not necessarily the best room for the documentation and the recording of our public engagement process. And so there are some considerations that I want to explore with staff, with Mandy. So we're going to work through this and with my co-chair, and then we'll bring it to the body as well. But just have an expectation that if you have any strong opinions about here and why or not, we would love to hear from you over the next couple of weeks so that we can start to kind of put together an understanding of it. On that note, I would love to open it up for any audience participation.
Mr. Chair, before you move on,
Yes, sir.
I just want to know, I can't think of any other committees that don't meet in room 155. I just put that out there.
I think you are right, and that was Member Constant, and as we get a little of the history of why this building has been the building for this meeting, and we have an understanding of where everything else is happening and the convenience and the effectiveness. And we have another meeting immediately after this at 1:55 for Assembly members, and that's often. So yes, thank you for raising that. Let's explore that. I think there's some obvious directionality where that may head, but I want us to all be at least on notice that we're going to look at that. Did you have something?
Oh, I was just gonna say it's 11, isn't it?
Yeah, on next week. Yeah, this is what I'm saying.
Oh, you meant room 155.
Yes.
Okay. I'm like, you're gonna miss it, George.
No, that's good. Roll?
Yeah, well, actually, I had a quick update, not on the room topic, but
Okay,
something
cool.
for this committee.
Well, just hold on a second.
Yeah.
Christopher, did you have something to say about the room?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to point out that the primary reason that these meetings are held out here is because this is where the offices are of the departments that we're talking about, planning, development services, et cetera. We have found that participation is higher from staff members when in this building versus City Hall. It sounds ridiculous to say, but it's quite a commute between the two buildings. As someone who used to make that trek at least 6 times daily, it eats up significant parts of the day. So to the extent that we can keep that in mind, that staff participation is critical to the success of this committee, and if we can meet them where they're at, I think it'll be more beneficial. As far as rooms, we used to meet in 170, which is down the hall, a little bit smaller, but set up round table style. I thought was definitely more conducive to the roundtable discussions that you host in these committees. I can't speak to the quality of the recordings in that room either. I think both rooms are technologically obsolete, but I would love to see that change too.
Thank you for raising that up, and yeah, we'll keep this item as we explore forward. And did you have anything on this?
Well, Anna, we met in a room for the bike equity ordinance that had good TV functionality, screen. Do you remember what room that was?
I don't remember the number. I know it was one of the smaller planning conference rooms, so the question might be how many seats it has.
Yeah.
I think so. I wasn't there in person.
Yeah, that seemed like it worked well, but it might be too small.
So we'll move on and just say any options, ideas, they're welcome. We'll move on, and Member Brawley had an item that you wanted to provide an update on.
Yeah, so this is related to the alcohol licensing, and I'm sorry I didn't think to ask to put this on the agenda, but I wanted to request on behalf of the sponsors, so it's myself and Constant and Roland working on this, and this is the continued implementation of Senate Bill 9, the state license changes that we're working through, and so we anticipate at least one ordinance TBD what's in it to do that, and then also working with staff in multiple departments to kind of smooth that implementation. So I know that licensing typically sits with this committee, and so I don't want to take up a lot of this committee's time, but I think it'd be helpful maybe to have a monthly update or something just to keep people informed. Because there was also a request from some of the industry folks that other assembly members, they just want to make sure folks are kept in the loop, and then Open Meetings Act restricts me from doing that. But just to make sure, because I know it is a big thing, and there's always going to be a lot of questions, and it's a pretty technical topic, so just want to make sure that we're keeping this committee informed about that, and then at some point maybe having some kind of discussion with this committee in the fall. And then just to say, our goal is to pass that ordinance hopefully on December 5th, and so we're looking to introduce November 7th, to give more than the normal time to have it out there, and so we're looking at probably October would be the time to come. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great.
And then I can follow up with you and
Yes.
Kevin. Yeah.
Yes, and just thank you for that. And just a reminder to all members, if there are items that you want to provide an update on that are part of your workflow, let us know. We'll make sure that it's on the agenda. Absolutely. Thank you all. We move to audience participation. I don't see any members of the audience that want to say anything out loud today. So if there are no audience participation, anyone on the phone that's not a member of the body, would like to say anything? If there are any additional final comments from members? Anybody on the phone? Additional final comments? And with that,
None here.
thank you all. With that, we'll adjourn this meeting at 10:12. Thank you, everybody.